Hello, I'm John Schneider. As a kid, I'd come to the New Jersey Bayshore to visit my Grandma Vi and take home movies of what I saw. Today I live here, produce video documentaries, and recently shot this boat at night with my video camera. Where is the Jersey Bayshore? Well, let's start with the big picture. It's somewhere in here, part of the universe, and it's definitely part of our world. But it's like no place I've ever experienced. And as soon as we land, I'll show you around. There are four things which I humbly conceive are essential to the well-being, I may even venture to say, to the existence of the United States as an independent power. First, an indissoluble union of the states under one federal head. Second, a sacred regard to public justice. Third, the adoption of a proper peace establishment. And fourth, the prevalence of that pacific and friendly disposition among the people of the United States, which will induce them to forget their local prejudices and policies, to make those mutual concessions which are requisite to the general prosperity, and in some instances to sacrifice their individual advantages to the interest of the community. Signed, General George Washington, 1783. Hello everybody, I'm your host for Jersey Bayshore Country, John Schneider, and I'm in the backyard behind a very historic house. It's the Burrowes Mansion in Matawan, New Jersey, and we're going to visit it during this program. Some people say it's haunted. It's inhabited by the ghosts of Margaret as well as, 12 or 13 other ghosts. And if you look in the upstairs window, sometimes you can see her, people say. I was invited to spend the night in this house, and I did, but more about that later. This was a house that was inhabited by patriots to the cause, who wanted freedom for our country, and didn't like the Tories or the Loyalists, who were mostly people who agreed with King George that this country should be dominated by Great Britain. So one night, the Loyalists or the Tories came to this house and tried to burn it down, and Margaret, who may still inhabit the house, tried to stop them. I hope you enjoy this story about the Burrowes Mansion. It's fascinating. It's a part of our living history about the Revolutionary War here in Jersey Bayshore Country. We're going to talk first to John, a.k.a. Al Savalane, who is the historian from Matawan and knows more about this house than almost anybody else.
The American Revolution was a civil war because you had a group called the Patriots who felt that they could establish their own country and do as good a job as the mother country, and had loyalists who felt did not think of themselves as Americans, but felt that they were British subjects living in the colonies. The colonists had been here for quite a while. Think of Jamestown and the Pilgrims and Plymouth Rock and things like that. So before the Revolution, for almost 150 years, you had Americans over here. We had Harvard University, we had Columbia University in New York City, very old institutions. We're developing our own elite of people who are educated and who are starting to think more and more as Americans. And as this is going on, the British had allowed significant self-government. They said that, you're pretty well organized over there, and you're really, Englishmen, and you've had good background, you're related to us, you're like our cousins. You take care of things. You run your own local affairs, but as far as commerce with the mother country, we'll have more of a say in that. We'll put a local government over with you, but you pretty much take care of it. You handle your own thing. And now they were looking to the colonies, and they're saying, yes, we gave you a lot of, discretion about taxing yourself. But now, if we're going to keep an army over there, you're going to have to contribute to this, and we're going to tax you from London. And this is different acts like the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Tea Act. A lot of these things were coming later. And it's like anything else. You give someone a privilege, and they get used to it. Then you try to take that privilege away, whether it's a union or anybody else, someone is going to squawk. And that's what happened here. The colonists were getting very indignant, and they were calling this taxation without representation. It wasn't so much that the taxes were so high and that we were being economically hurt. It was the principle of the thing. You trusted us like we were the good kids in the family, and you gave us privileges. Now you're treating us just like anybody else. At first, most of the people down here were not real enthusiastic about rebelling against Great Britain, but the British did some very stupid moves. King George III was a very stubborn man, and he had advisors who actually gave him some very poor advice. There were several times during the American Revolution where we could have negotiated this thing. In fact, most of the colonists, the leaders in the colonies, wanted to negotiate. They did not want to fight a war. Independence didn't even come into it yet, but they did not want to take up arms against some other country. They figured that recognize how we were before. Let's go back by giving us more self-government like we were before, and everything will be honky-dory. We'll forget about some of these infringements, things that you've slighted us, and we'll go back because it wasn't so bad. But King George and his advisors felt that we're in charge now, and you're going to do what we say. The British were now garrisoning troops in homes. People would, if you have a house here, you can take 2 British soldiers. You have a bigger house, you can take 4 British soldiers. And some of these people were not the nicest house guests. And that led to the Boston Massacre in 1770. And that's the time when the shooting started. The people, the talk in the tavern about I'm a loyalist, like a Democrat, that ended. Now, if you were a patriot or a loyalist, and there were spies sometimes would identify you, you could be executed in the middle of the night. Or your farm could be, this happened, if you were a loyalist or a patriot in an area that wasn't very favorable, the other group would come in and they would burn your crops, they would burn your farmhouse down, they would steal your animals. Any farm animals they couldn't steal, they'd kill. And if you didn't take off pretty quickly, your life would be in danger. It was being a rich agricultural area. Many times the British would come down here when they wanted to resupply their troops, and our patriots were not going to just sell to them. If they were truly in a patriot area, we'd shoot at them. So it became very inconvenient for the British to buy agricultural goods in Monmouth County, because they'd probably have to take out several companies of infantry to go with a supply wagon if they were going to buy something, because there's a good chance somebody would shoot at them. In fact, a lot of the agricultural products to feed the British during the American Revolution actually came from Ireland. It was easier to bring the food across the Atlantic Ocean than to go into Monmouth County and fight those nasty patriots who aren't going to quite give up everything. So a lot of the fighting took place with American patriots fighting American loyalists. So gradually, in this part of New Jersey, even though it wasn't quite the hotbed up in New England, it was more even between the loyalists and patriots. But it depended on what area of New Jersey you lived in as to whether it would be stronger with the patriot cause or with the loyalist cause. Most of the people in Middletown Point were with the patriot cause. If you were a loyalist, you'd be a closet loyalist, and you wouldn't talk about it too much. You might hope that the Patriots lose someday, but you're not going to go out on Main Street and shout, "Yay for the loyalists," because someone would come and settle you down. All wars are bad, but civil wars are particularly ugly because you've got people, sometimes within a family on both sides shooting at each other, and sometimes neighbors who had been very friendly, people in the same church, part their ways, and that becomes very ugly. And it was that way in Monmouth County. If you were in the militia or you were fighting, almost 100% sure you could say you're a patriot, because what it took to go up and face regular troops, and if you were captured, the chance of being put on a prison hulk or being executed. So no one was going to do that who was wishy-washy. Certainly no one who was a loyalist. Since this was a patriot area, the British, when they occupied Manhattan and Staten Island, had all kinds of British shipping in Raritan Bay. And there was a group of colonials who were privateers. And they would operate out of this Raritan Bay area, especially the inlets like Matawan Creek, different things like that, where the whaleboats were about 20 feet long, and they had bows at both ends. They were shallow water craft, not ocean going, but shallow water, about 20 feet long, bows at both ends, so they could very quickly shift direction one way or another. And usually on the front, which they would, or maybe on both sides, but one they might designate the front, they'd have a swivel gun where they could fire, but a small caliber swivel gun, not a cannon, but a small caliber swivel gun. And these whaleboats would go out armed by patriots. Sometimes 18, 20 patriots would be there. They would have cutlasses and pistols for close order fighting. And they would go out into Raritan Bay from some of these inlets, and they would go beside a ship, a British ship, cargo ship, not a warship, but a cargo ship. They'd throw a grappling hook up, and they'd climb up, and they would take over the ship, and they would fight the crew. And typically the crew were not, military, so it didn't take as much to take over a ship when you're talking about just paid sailors. John Burrowes had in his mill ponds, deep areas, he supported the whaleboat navy. In fact, he had about 3 different whaleboats hidden in his mill ponds. Now, this, if the British would discover this, this was a capital offense, because you're doing a major thing against the British war effort. They would string you up to a tree. So it took a lot of courage to support this. Everybody here knew what he was doing, and that's why they identified him as a patriot. Also, he was a member of the Sons of Liberty. And remember the Boston Tea Party, this group up in Boston who threw the tea overboard? He was a member of the group, and when the British shut down the port of Boston and the people depended a lot of shipping coming in to bring goods, and John Burroughs sent a lot of his corn and his grains via different channels up by boat up to help the people of Boston, which was another capital offense if they caught you doing that, because you're working against the British government. The thought of going against the British Empire, the most powerful empires in the world, with what we had here, a tiny country of 13 small colonies without a real military. We had militia people, not professional soldiers, and we didn't really have a navy, was unthinkable. So gradually we moved in that direction more and more. You could see why many of the loyalists were hesitant at first to join up with the Patriots and to raise their hands to join the Continental Army, in that it was a significant step. And in those days, if you went into rebellion against the mother country, you were not considered an average combatant, like on European terms when armies fought, professional armies fought. You were considered a traitor and a rebel. Now, the British didn't have officials stationed in town here. They were in other areas, but the loyalists would have contact with their British counterparts, and the British would certainly ask, who are the leaders in the area? And John Burroughs would certainly be listed because of what he did. And being we were a village, not even a small town, a village. So when grain was being sent up to help the people of Boston, or whaleboats were being hid on the mill stream, everybody in town knew about it. So I'm sure the loyalists would pass that information on. But now the British would have to decide, okay, this guy, we'd like to get him, but what does it take to get him? Now, we can't just send, a couple people to arrest him, or they'll end up dead. So it would take a military action to actually come in here to arrest him. So they find out that he's coming here into Middletown Point to the house here in town to visit his young wife. So they decide to launch a raid from Sandy Hook. Out on Sandy Hook were the New Jersey Royal Volunteers, the Skinner Greens. So they decide they're gonna launch a raid, come across Raritan Bay, and try to capture Captain Burroughs. In those days, it was important to capture important people. They would be used as pawns in negotiation. So if you were a notorious person, it was good to have you in your jail. So if ever you needed to have a prisoner exchange with someone, it's good to have somebody important. So Captain Burroughs was very high on that list. So they decided to launch a raid. It's a night of May 27th, 1778. It's about 12 midnight. And what's interesting, this is almost exactly 1 month to the day of the famous Battle of Monmouth, which took place down the road in Freehold, which was called Monmouth Courthouse in those days, which was the largest land engagement in North America. And so the Skinner Greens decide to send a contingent, about 70 Skinner Greens, to try to capture Captain Burroughs. So they're coming across Raritan Bay by longboat, and they land up around Keyport, where they can get into more shallow water. And they're starting to march in this direction. Now, some people locally who are loyalists are starting to join up with the Skinner Greens as they're coming in this direction. Now, the Patriot spies up on Fox Hill also notice what's going on, and they kind of put 2 and 2 together, and they see Skinner Greens coming toward Middletown Point, and Captain Burroughs happens to be on a leave with his young wife. I'll bet they're coming for Captain Burroughs. So Patriot spies came here to the mansion, and they told Captain Burroughs that there's Skinner Greens coming in this direction, and they're probably coming for you. And so Captain Burroughs jumps out the back window, swims across Matawan Creek, and is hiding in the woods up on the other side. Now, as the Skinner Greens are coming in this direction, the Patriot spies also let the Patriot militia units know. So now they're beating their drums, and the Minutemen are coming out of their houses. So there's one company of Patriot militia in this section of town, another over in the southern part of the Freneau section. So these two Patriot groups are starting to move towards the center of Middletown Point. By this time, the Skinner Greens are coming up Church Street. And just about where Church Street runs into Broad Street in Matawan, the fighting starts. And now the Colonials are fighting the Skinner Greens, and a lot of shooting going on. and lives are being taken. But remember, the whole purpose of coming here wasn't just a fight with the local Patriots. It was a raid to capture Captain Burrowes. So a group from the fighting separates and they wind their way around the back alleys, and they come to the Burrowes Mansion. And this is close to midnight at this time, so everything seems to be dark inside. So they come and they force the door open, and the Skinner Greens come inside. Their armed Skinner Greens come inside the entryway. Now, coming down the stairwell is this young girl. She has a candle, and she has her nightdress on, and she's wearing a little shawl over her shoulders. Now, she's a teenage girl, not real robust, kind of a frail teenage girl. But remember, her name is Margaret Foreman Burrowes. She's a foreman, and these foremans are tough cookies, and they're strong patriots. And as the Tories come in the front entryway, they're standing in the hallway, she says, "What are you doing in my house?" Well, they're amazed with this girl. This young girl is shouting at us, giving us a hard time, and they're kind of taken aback. And first they say, "Well, there's been some fighting uptown. We have some wounded men, and we want your shawl so we can bind the wounds of some of our wounded men." She had her night shawl on, and this young girl, in front of these armed Tories standing in her entryway, makes this little speech: "I'll not give my shawl or anything in this house," to a British subject. You could imagine how a fiery speech like that would go across to armed Tories standing in your entryway. So at that point, they figure, enough of this. He's hiding behind her, and she's stalling. So they rush up the stairwell. A Tory officer hits, Margaret Foreman Burrowes is standing on the landing. A Tory officer hits her across the chest with the hilt of his sword and knocks her down, almost knocks her off the landing. His intent wasn't really to kill her, but it was to hurt her, to get her out of the way. And if you're making this speech to us, we'll show you. So he hurts her, and eventually she will die from these not that night, but eventually she will die from the injuries she sustains the night of the raid. But they start rushing around the house. Remember, Captain Burrowes got earlier word. He jumped out the back window. He's hiding in the back of the Matawan Creek. They don't know that. They think he's hiding up in the servants' quarters. John Burrowes also at that time was a slave owner. He owned several dozen slaves. He had house servants who were slaves who were up in the slave quarters. So they think Captain Burrowes is hiding up there. They fire their muskets up into the servants' quarters, up on the third floor. We still have musket ball holes from that night in 1778 there, if you're coming on a tour of the Burrowes Mansion. And they're just, I'm sure, some very, very scared servants under their beds up there. But they finally rush around. They realize that Captain Burrowes isn't in the house. So now they decide to make an example of the whole Burrowes family. So they take all the furniture in the house, some very, very nice furniture, because John Burrowes was quite well-to-do and a very successful merchant, and they make a bonfire in front of the house, just so everybody in the town sees all of this very nice things being burned. So they're taking all this beautiful furniture, all the interior items, and they also decide to torch the house. And later on, when we did an archaeological restoration, we noticed all along the back of the house, char marks where it had been burned at one time. But fortunately, the people in the village were able to put the house out before it was completely consumed. So you have a very, very strong patriot feeling with this house here on Main Street, the Burrowes Mansion. The mansion is opened officially 2 days a month, the first and third Sunday of the month from 2 to 4 in the afternoon are formal visiting hours at the mansion. But we are also open for groups that would like to have meetings here, or if you'd like to have a special tour, or to bring your group in at a different time. If you contact the Burrowes Mansion or the Matawan Historical Society website, we can provide that type of service for a group, and you can have your meeting here, and we will give you a tour of the Burrowes Mansion. A typical tour of the mansion lasts about 1 hour. There's quite a bit to talk about as we go through the mansion, both the 18th century aspect, and as the mansion has had a number of different occupants up until the 20th century. We have artifacts from a lot of very nice 18th century furniture, artifacts from different periods, Victorian furniture, things like that, and a lot of stories to tell you about different people who have lived in the mansion. It's quite a history, almost 300 years of history. In fact, the last family to live in the Burrowes Mansion was the Brown family. They came in 1904. Benjamin Franklin Strong Brown was the publisher of the Matawan Journal, one of our first newspapers here, and descendants of the family lived here until 1974, when the mansion was turned over to the town of Matawan to become a museum. The last resident of the mansion, her name was Mildred Brown Herrick, had written a number of different articles about the mansion for some local publications. And she mentioned that when she was growing up as a girl, in the front parlor area, this would be the early 20th century, in the front parlor area, they had a rocking chair. And there was an old gentleman with a three-cornered hat, colonial type dress, who would sit in the rocking chair, rocking back and forth, kind of doing his own thing. And they would walk by and they would say something. He wouldn't really look to them. He would just keep rocking. And they felt very comfortable. And for years, he was like their resident ghost. And they would, they spread this information on, that there was a man who kind of stays at our house, and he's welcome, and we try to be friendly to him. We've also, some of the earlier accounts of the Burrowes Mansion, historical type evidence, indicates that some people had recorded seeing a light going up and down the stairwell at the mansion. And they kind of put two and two together, that since Margaret Foreman had been injured in the mansion and eventually became a fatality of that night of the raid, that they believed that might have been her spirit, with a light going up and down the stairway. And up to this date, we've had 17 paranormal groups come to the mansion to actually do long, thorough, scientific type investigations. Each group, I've been present at each investigation. Each group has found one thing or another of interest that has indicated through their experiences that certain things that go on here are of a paranormal nature.
So Margaret, who is a patriot in her own right, supposedly haunts this house, I think in a very nice way, I hope. I was invited to spend the night at this mansion, which I did. Al Savelaine, the historian from Matawan, said, "Come on, bring your camera, bring your microphones, bring all your equipment, and experience it for yourself." So that's what I did, and I'm going to bring you along with me. Here's my report on the haunting of Burrowes Mansion. And Burrowes Mansion is in Matawan. Matawan is such an old historic area, so many wonderful shops and old buildings, you've just got to see it. Many of the homes date back hundreds of years, and the Burrowes Mansion is no exception. I spent a lot of time in preparation. I strolled around Matawan looking at all these old homes and thinking to myself, what am I going to do if I see a ghost? And here it is. I spent some time walking around the house and around the grounds, and then it was time to go inside. I spent a lot of time in the center hall because that seemed to be where all the action was during the Revolutionary War. But at some point, I was drawn to something in the house. I talked to Al about where were the spirits mostly. He said if you go upstairs in the slave quarters, there's a lot more negative energy. So we went up the steps, we went up to an area where the slaves were quartered and where they served the masters who lived in the house. And I looked in one particular room and I was drawn to this area right here.
What are these drawings? Do you have any idea what they are? They're very primitive. They don't look like drawings that, you'd... Milk face.
Now, what I learned about milk face later on was milk face was a derogatory term for the slave owner. And I asked Al, did he know anything about these drawings? He's been in this house for over 10 years. He's been associated with the house for 40. He's been on 17 paranormal investigations inside this house, and he or any of the paranormal investigators that have investigated this house have seen this drawing before. That amazed me.
Winifred, which is a very old name, right? McGrath? Winifred McGrath. I think that's what it says. Winifred McGrath, and I don't know what that is in Milkface. So this is Winifred McGrath is here. And this, you would assume, is Milkface.
Now, I got chills when I saw this, and my chills got goosebumps when Al told me he had never seen this drawing before. And it really concerned me, because here was Winifred, a lady of some kind, or maybe a child, who looked fairly healthy, had fingers and toes, and here was Milkface. Milkface was reaching out to Winifred and had a very small, little tiny head, and underneath Milkface, between his legs, I assume it's a male, was a little tail, or perhaps a sexual organ. I don't know, but it looked bad.
It seems to be there were some sad stories up here. But I'm not necessarily frightened that I'm going to be harmed or anything, but I just don't, I usually don't stay up here much longer than I really need to. A number of different things have gone on in the house. Sometimes when you're a tour guide, you'll emphasize certain things as if that were the basic character of the house. What the spirits tend to indicate is that what you say may be true, but there are a lot of other stories that you aren't telling that maybe you don't even know about. And that's where I get the feeling that this is a little bit more complex than just an old house. But I also learned that I'm fascinated in that, for that very same reason, that I want to learn about these other aspects of the house. I want to know about the personalities, and as a historian, I love a good story, something that I can relate to someone else, about a time period, about an incident, or something that will help someone learn to appreciate what life was like during a different era. And that's why, you know, when I have these sensations that the spirits are here, it just lets me know that there's still quite a bit I have to learn.
This is a cliffhanger, ladies and gentlemen. It's the end of our show, and we're going to, in the next episode, do the spirit investigation. I'm not a paranormal investigator, but I find some very interesting things, and I'm going to share them on the next program.